maybe what I can do is open the floor, and as I do open the floor, draw the joined dots between the last presentations that we've had. There has been so much talk and very important reflection on the systemic approach, whether it be, again, the social fiber of our urban cities, whether it be the built environment, the anatomy of the built environment, which was so well presented, whether it be the use of compasses, whether it be the systems compass that we put forward, or the very important Mari Aura compass, whether it be the donut, which we haven't spoken about enough, the new donut economic model, or the circularity moving to a regenerative model. What we've seen in all of these approaches is the shift from linearity, coming back to the importance of understanding systemic interrelationships, the fact that actually circularity and regeneration is our redemption, and the fact that it basically brings us back to the core of our relationship with the world and nature. So if we can open up the conversation, also bringing in the very important points that were made by you, Andrea, at the end, which for me are key. We have seen so much deep reflection over the last 2 days, and there is much more out there. We know we have the tools in the toolbox to make the changes that we need to make to get to our ultimate paradise, whatever that might be. The key question is, do we have the scale? Do we have the political will? And the regulatory structures that will enable us to move forward fast enough? And if we don't have that, then what is it that we need to hold governments accountable and also bring citizens on the journey? Because ultimately, it will be the citizens, the people, that will suffer the most from the poor decisions that are made. That should be some of the reflection as we move forward, so that we can make all the great reflections a reality that we've had today, bring in this incredible indigenous knowledge that has been shared with us, and all of the different types of community knowledge, of spiritual knowledge, and also of scientific knowledge in order to truly build that paradise and that garden that John was referring to. Are there any reflections from this last session before we move on to the next?
Thanks so much. So I want to pick up on Andrea's last point about the legal reform as a precondition for structural change. And so the pockets of knowledge we've been triangulating is very much about the two dimensions that drives the shifts in understanding that you've just summarized. The one is community mobilization, indigenous knowledge, and so forth, but that has typically been prefigurative practices, right? Where there's a demonstration of alternatives at a micro scale and how to network those. And we've heard a lot about policy and technical reform and technological change and so forth, and how that could be blended or folded into alternative economic frameworks. What we haven't heard about is radical political disruption and protest. And how does that get resourced? How does that get validated? How does that get foregrounded? And so I think that if we can maybe reflect a little bit about what's the place for democratic disruption and for radical transformation of the, if you will, the validating institutions we are all using as reference points, the UN, the global system, and so on. That's, of course, all necessary and important, but let's not kid ourselves that that is going to produce transformative change.
Excellent question. Thank you, Edgar. John.
So first of all, thanks again to the ladies in New Zealand and the lady in Rome for everything you said, and just a systemic reflection maybe that can enter whatever will be the emerging products of this conference. And because you asked for that, Sandrine, and I've worked on complex systems for at least 40 years now, probably even earlier. And I just wonder why we also talk about the garden. I think what happened in the 1950s in particular, everywhere, even in science, was this reductionist approach, reducing the chaos of living ecosystems, living societies, even science, into pure components, very simple components you can easily understand. And this is originally human beings lived, for example, in the jungle. But as Anna Maria showed us, these were anthropomorphic jungles in a way. Yeah? In the Amazon, you showed us really stunning examples of indigenous cultures entangled with their nature, so to speak. And what we tried to do with the Industrial Revolution and what I experienced as a child in Bavaria in the 1950s was that we tried to extract the pure components, potatoes, wheat, whatever you have, sugar beans and so on, and separate them from each other and turn landscape into assembly lines, emulating factories, really. In factories where you have thermodynamics, the laws of physics, you have to separate things and you look at the pure components which are super efficient, of course, because the laws of thermodynamics tell you go to the efficiency limit and so on. And we tried to turn our lands into assembly lines, into factories, separating the pure components, but we do not have enough land for separating each. So we have to reintegrate the non-pure components. We have to dare to be inefficient to some extent, to be resilient, to have some slack. And that is in my view, the metaphor of the garden. In a garden, a well-tended garden, you feel some chaos, of course. You have interaction between the various plants. And still there is some stewardship there. It's the reintegration of various capacities, services, and so on in a garden, actually. So just to get me right, but this is not just some philosophical sort of excursion here. I was for 28 years a member and also chair of the German Advisory Council on Global Change, who invented, by the way, the 2 degrees target and a few other things, and the carbon budget approach and so on, and the Great Transformation. And one of our last flagship report for the German government was land use in the Anthropocene, from competition to integration. And we thought about it, in the semiconductor industry and so on, you create ever smaller chips with ever more functions, so to speak, which brought about Moore's law of ever more capacities, doubling capacities every 2 years and so on. Why not trying to reintegrate the various functionalities, the various products and so on land, because we do not have enough land. As Mark Twain famously said, by land, we don't make it anymore. And that is true. So we have to use the precious land we have and reintegrate it. And I think the paradigm of the garden needs to be explored for that. And it can be a wild garden, it can be an English garden, a French garden, an Italian garden, an Amazon garden, an African garden, what have you. There are many gardens on this planet, but we have to become gardeners of the land again. So that's my intervention here.
Thank you so much, John. And I've been told that, of course, we've run out of time. So I'd like to, first of all, thank... apologies. Okay, quick reflection. I apologize. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I will make this statement knowing that we have run out of time. I just want to put forth a small provocation here in the desire, building on what Edgar just said here, in the desire to build these systems which have served us in many cases quite well. It is that chaos and the entropy in that's lost. And some of that is energy that's directed through human protest or community, and some of it is from the non-human forms of dialogue or protest, whether it's in biology or through animals and things like that. I wonder what these systems look like we're talking about when what is lost when we systematize, and how do we maintain or bring that what is not fully measurable into our responses and into these models that we're talking about today. Thank you.
Perfect closure, and exactly the point that I wanted to close on. So thank you for that, because we are in the midst of chaos. And actually, we're being formed to transform in the midst of chaos. And we've seen that actually through COVID, for good or for bad, transformation did exist. So chaos is here. It's alive and well. The key question now is, how do we actually accept chaos as a way to enable us to grow, rather than reduce it, as in exactly John's words? And coming back to you, Edgar, I would actually say that it is the chaos that is going to force actually those in the street to have a stronger voice, because policymakers are still within their linear paradigms and they haven't yet shifted. We need to remind them that actually chaos is okay. That brings in soft data. It also means we need to look at the way in which we look at research and innovation, which is that sometimes innovation is on the ground, actively happening, rather than in an academic environment. So new types of knowledge gathering, innovation during chaos, and accepting that, trying to cultivate it, and then bringing it forward for change is fundamental. Thank you for a very rich session, and thank you to our speakers.